Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. And we are back here with our friend, Kat Schwarz. Excited to have her here because she's done so much to help people. She's a holistic healer. She's been through her own share of things, but she's really compassionate. Hence, the title of her company is Compassionate Healing Services. And she's here to help you. She's from Medford, New Jersey, but she can work with you anywhere around the world. Mental health, physical health is super important to her. And she's an empath. There's a lot to her. I'll let her do more of the introduction, and we'll kind of talk a little about something last week you brought up I want to mention, and a few more things. So go ahead.
Yes, I'm excited for today. It's a big one. So I am Kat Schwarz. I am the owner, as you said, of Compassionate Healing Services. It really does embody who I am, and what I try to spread on the planet is a little bit more understanding, a little bit more compassion for those for whom we typically consider unlovable at some time. Those of us who suffer, especially with severe mental illness, know the feeling of shame that comes around certain behaviors. And, the feeling of shame really is that you are bad. Guilt is I did something bad. Shame is I am bad. And so many of us who deal with, and I include myself, because my journey here was through personal experience with severe mental illness, bipolar disorder specifically, and suicidality in 2017. And what helped me to get out of it was taking a completely unique view of everything that was happening to me and everything that I was being taught that didn't necessarily resonate with me. And that really bleeds into what we're going to talk about today.
Yes, it is. Let's recap a little bit from last week, because you were talking about they're on this journey to really eliminate prescription drugs from everyone's life and daily routine, right? And you
Not
talked about for
prescription.
weight loss, right? And that crusade, and explain why the use of drugs, in a sense, weight loss, prescription, I should say, medications. Can you explain that a little bit further?
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to clarify, it's definitely not a crusade against the prescription drugs in general. This is specific to the
For
prescription
those,
of intentional weight loss, because
got it.
that
Yep.
very much is a prescription in our medical society.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, if you are above a certain BMI, which is typically the criteria that's used, automatically, essentially, healthcare is denied to you until you, quote, get control of your weight. And there's a huge problem with that I really want to talk through today. And I apologize in advance if it looks like I'm reading from my notes. It's probably because I am, because I
That's
want
okay.
very specific today and making sure that we've hit all these important points. So I'm going to do my best, as I said, to break it down, but I want to start with a favorite quote from an unknown to me source. Feel free to let me know who said it, but it's that dieting is a cure that doesn't work for a
Mhm.
disease that doesn't exist. And when I speak of dieting, everyone comes at me with, oh, I just talk about dieting as my way of eating. It's my diet. And I don't mean that. I specifically mean the intentional pursuit of weight loss.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if that's extremely common, I participated in it for well over 20 years. We'll talk about that. It's praised, and it's even encouraged and even prescribed, as I started to say, by our medical physicians. And that's in line with the recommendations of the American Medical Association. So that makes sense. The huge problem with that is that it's not supported by evidence, and in fact has been shown to do way more harm than benefit. Okay, so I want to back up and explain a few things here. First, that dieting is as old as I am. I was born in 1979. It was in the very early 80s that dieting became a huge
Mhm.
fad, that this idea that we had control and should control our body weights, that health is a personal responsibility, really came into popular culture. And it not only affected me societally, especially as a woman, but in my own family was very much a message that I got. I lived in a family where most of the people that I'm in relationship with live in bigger bodies. I have a lot of family members that died at early ages from diabetes complications. I was somebody who was really taught to be, quote, careful about what I ate, that every morsel essentially that went in my mouth and every calorie that I burned was essential truly for my health. And I wasn't healthy unless I was living in a very specific way. I watched my own mother lose and then regain 100 pounds on Weight Watchers. And I was taught dieting, and Weight Watchers specifically became a part of my life when I was a teenager. And then even well into my late 30s, I used Weight Watchers, or early 30s, I should say, I used Weight Watchers to, lose the baby weight as I thought I needed to.
Oh,
These were things that were handed to me. And then more concerningly, I was taught that not just as a woman and not just in my specific family, but as a master's student in a physical therapy program, right? I was
Right.
taught all of these things, that your health is equal, thin is out healthy, fat is unhealthy, calories in versus calories out. That's the formula for good health, right? And I bought in hook, line, and sinker for
Yeah.
20 years as a career, as a physical therapist. For the majority of that, certainly not all, I was prescribing or at least recommending dieting because I was participating in dieting and I thought that I was doing my patients a service,
Yep.
right? And then in 2015, something radical changed, and it was a book by authors called Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch. The book is called Intuitive Eating. You can find it now in its fourth edition. It was written back in 1995. We've had this information since. And what I really understood when I read that book on a very deep level is that dieting is the cause of what we call the problem of obesity, not the cure for it. So let's talk about that. So in fact, you can look it up. The number one predictor of weight gain is restrictive dieting.
Mm-hmm.
They are related. Okay. It's a well-known fact that between 80 and 95%, that 80 is really generous. It's much closer in most studies to 95% or higher of dieters will not only gain back the weight they lost, 3 to 5 year period. That's important. They 2/3 of those dieters will regain more than they lost.
Mm-hmm.
So these two women, and so much of what I'm going to talk about today goes well off of what intuitive eating itself will cover. I'll give credit when I can. This first thing that I want to talk about, the set point theory, looks like I can give credit to multiple authors for that. But let me explain the set point theory and how it
Sure.
explains what happens when we diet. So the set point theory essentially says that just like all your other traits, your hair color, your eye color, your height, your foot size, it's predetermined by genetics, right?
Yep.
Your weight range is no different. It's just that it's a range. Okay. It's a range of about 10 to 20 pounds where your body achieves what is known as homeostasis, perfect balance, biological balance. That's where your body's going to feel best. And the fact of the matter is that everyone has a unique set point, just like everyone has a unique hair color, eye color, height, right? We can accept that about so many things except bodies. It's strange
Yeah.
to me. Um, so we all have a different set point. And yet, because of this extremely arbitrary and frankly racist standard we know is the BMI or the body mass
Mm-hmm.
index, once a person typically, usually because the BMI, I'll explain, has been around since the 1800s. It was developed by a sociologist, statistician, and mathematician. Notice you didn't hear me say physician. The only white Western European men were used in the creation of it. And it was, quote, to determine the, quote, average man. Okay. So because the study itself is so old, and as a statistician, even the author himself, when it was called the Quetelet Index, said this was not for individuals, this was for
Yep.
populations. And yet in 1985, the National Institutes of Health decided to tie this to a person's individual health. And frankly, as a society, we've been suffering the consequences of that ever since. Okay. Because what happens is when a person diets, the body perceives that as an emergency. Your
Mm-hmm.
body, remember, famines existed
Yeah.
throughout human history, right? There was such a thing as simply not having access to food, and that
True.
is an emergency. Hunger is a biological
Mm-hmm.
need, right? So when your body perceives that you are not feeding it the calories it's asking for through the hunger signals and such, it's going to assume it's because there's no food to be had, right? It doesn't know that you're just on the latest Instagram fad, right?
Yep.
So, yes, while you are restricting your caloric intake to the point where there's a deficit, of course, your body's going to burn fat cells in the interim, right? To keep you alive, right? Thank you, body.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as that diet stops, as soon as that person goes into a maintenance phase, as soon as that person starts inviting even a little bit more food,
And mm-hmm.
then the body will make it a very, very sophisticated effort to try to get back to its biological set point. And what it's going to do now is it's going to take that set point weight, and your body is sophisticated. And this is going to take up to 3 to 5 years for it to happen. But I promise you, for about 95% of people, your body will be very successful in pulling back that weight, making that its number one priority, really to keep you alive in its view. And then add on a cushion of weight of extra of extra weight, right, for the
Yep.
next famine. And sure enough, most people, that weight starts to come back. They start to blame themselves instead of the diet. They don't understand the correlation. They go on what? Yet another diet. So you can see that over time, the set point theory explains why people who are dieting are growing bigger and bigger and bigger instead of smaller and smaller and smaller. It's just taking more time.
Yep.
So that's really important to understand, right? That you're essentially what we think is doing the um is the cure for it, this restricted diet is letting go of body weight, is in the long run causing the body to take on so much more weight, which is then
Yep.
correlated with, for some people, with health risks. But the thing is,
Mm-hmm.
the BMI doesn't just hurt fat people, right? The
Yep.
BMI hurts thin people because thin people are assumed to be healthy based on their BMI, when that's often not the case. And
No.
then no further testing is required, is ordered, whereas someone in a higher BMI might be denied healthcare literally altogether until they do the magic unicorn of finding a way, which no human ever really has, to lose weight and keep it off. Because let me be clear, the people that are going to come at me and say, well, I successfully kept off weight for 5, 10, I know the type, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are what we call active eating disorders, right? Or orthorexia, the pursuit of healthy eating above all else. It's an eating disorder. And it's an eating disorder that's glamorized by our
Yep.
society, right? So
Yeah.
these are really big topics, and we're going to tie in at the end. How does this even tie into my other role, as I see it, as a holistic healer and a suicide prevention specialist? And there is a very strong correlation here, and I will get to that at the end. So the first thing I wanted to cover is that truly, I'll be as blunt as I can about it. Any medical doctor that's still prescribing that dieting and using the BMI as the golden standard is not practicing evidence-based medicine.
Yep.
And it really is just a matter of the culture and the medical community catching up to the science of it. So to go back to that original quote, dieting is a cure for disease that doesn't exist. I'm sorry, dieting is a cure that doesn't work for a disease that
Yep.
doesn't exist, right? It's based on this very inherently racist measure, right? If a measure was
Yep.
is hundreds of years old at this point, has only taken into account white Western European men, how could it, and the answer, it doesn't, in any way accurately capture or predict the health measures of women, right? Of people of people in people of color, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of this is, we're using, again, a white supremacist standard that's based on BS, if I can be as plain as I can about it.
Yep.
When I teach classes on the BMI, I say the B stands for bullshit, if I can say that. I'm
You can
sorry if
say
I
that.
can't.
Absolutely. Bullshit. I could say it too. Yes. We
All
can
right,
say
cool.
whatever we want on the radio.
I've already said it. I've already said it. So it's done. So, and then the other piece of that, right? And I hate the word, but I'm going to use it just because it's going to keep us, we're going to all know what we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
right? The quote, disease of obesity isn't a disease at all. It's pathologizing fat bodies on a completely arbitrary standard,
Yep.
right? And for a much more in-depth look, I want you to please read the book Fearing the Black Body. That's by Dr. Sabrina Strings. And there's also an article by a fantastic blogger known as Your Fat Friend entitled The Bizarre and Racist History of the BMI. These are far more in-depth and expert looks at these topics, but so please don't take my word for it. Do some further research on your own.
Got
Um,
it.
and when it comes to what is known as the obesity paradox, what that has shown us is that health is fat protective, right? As a former physical therapist who went into many nursing homes and assisted livings, I can tell you, I promise you, the people on my schedule who had a little bit more meat on their bones were
Yep.
far more healthy
Yep.
than the women who were extremely petite and so vulnerable, especially to osteoporosis and
Process.
that
Yep.
nature
Mm-hmm.
that caused fractures, right? So this idea that thin is healthy and fat is unhealthy is, again, really not supported by evidence. And
Yep.
there's even such a thing known as the obesity paradox, because more and more we're seeing that people with chronic diseases who live in bodies that are, quote, based on the BMI, well, BS standards, mildly overweight to obese, or overweight to mildly obese rather, are living longer than their thinner counterparts. So again, this idea that that thinness is the standard when it comes to health is just not supported by evidence. I'll keep saying it. All right, so let's talk about how this ties in, if we will, to social justice, right?
Okay.
Because if you look me up on Instagram, and I hope you do, I'm Compassionate Healing Services, at Compassionate Healing Services. My personal account, I keep that private, but it's the Feminist Yogi, and that's not just a title to me. I've always had an inherent sense of what is right and what is wrong, right? And when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to the patriarchal society, white supremacist, capitalist society that I was raised in, I'm not afraid to use my voice to say that we're doing it all wrong here,
Yep.
right? And the fact is that people who live in bigger bodies face very, very real discrimination and violent oppression, right?
Wow. Wow.
Street harassment, whether they're looked over for jobs because they're assumed to be lazy, whether they're told to have lower standards in romantic relationships because they're, quote, lucky to be chosen in the first place. And then most egregiously, when they are quite literally denied quality healthcare, or any healthcare at all, any treatment that their thinner counterparts would be offered for the same conditions or diseases, are simply not given access to them. And the gatekeeper is this BMI, right?
Yep.
So you can see where
Mm-hmm.
that crusade comes from, right? And I already explained how this is not that we should only care about it because it kills thin people too, but it's killing thin people too,
Yep.
right? It's just
Yep.
like patriarchy hurts men,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone, so does this, right? This is a house of cards that really needs to fall so that we can really look at the root issues here. And and one of the most horrifying examples of how we use the BMI to interfere in people's lives is not only in denying them healthcare, but quite literally, there are absolutely horrifying cases of parents having their children taken
Mm.
away because of their children having
Oh,
higher BMIs. So, this is something that I call myself a fat activist. People are very surprised when I say that, or they see it on my social media profile, because I know that I benefit from thin privilege in the same way that I benefit from white
yep.
privilege, right? I'm going on a plane tomorrow. I'm taking a work trip. So excited. It's
Wait,
to
where's this to?
Jamaica. To Jamaica. I'm so lucky.
It's a work trip? Oh my gosh.
A work trip, and I will be working hard, but I will also be
Awesome.
relaxing hard really well the rest
Oh,
as well.
absolutely. Uh-huh.
Um, Yes, and just the fact that I can buy a plane ticket and know that my body can comfortably fit in the seat, that's a privilege. And it drives me crazy when people, especially if you just want to go gloss over everything I've just said, will say, "Oh, well, that's because, fat people are fat by choice." No, they're not. Actually,
Oh,
if you listen to what I'm saying, you realize that the
yeah.
biggest people among us, those who are living in the biggest bodies, are usually the ones who have done the most dieting. They're usually the ones who learn this from a very young age and never stopped, and are still being told that it's their.
Wow.
And as I've said in previous episodes, we have to stop asking individuals to solve societal problems, right? So last thing I want to tie in, and I already alluded to this. How does this fit in, right? How does this fit into everything else we've talked about over this episode 8 of 9? In the last 7 episodes, we've talked a lot about different things related to holistic healthcare, holistic mental health care, and specifically suicide prevention. And the reason this ties in is complex. First, excuse me. First, it's because, and I'm looking at my notes. We've spoken at length about the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, right?
Yep.
The ACEs study. And that study was actually commissioned after an initial study by one of its 2 original authors, Dr. Vincent Felitti, who was the I believe medical director at a weight loss clinic back in the 80s.
Okay.
He discovered that the majority of the people who were dropping out of the program, he was very frustrated by the high dropout rate of the program. And when he did these individual interviews and started asking specific questions, he was
Yeah.
very shocked to find out that a majority of these participants had experienced childhood sexual trauma.
Yep.
And that he came to the conclusion that looking at somebody's weight alone, right? Looking at somebody's weight as a measure of health without delving into their trauma history, their past history, is like the analogy he used. It's like having the firefighters treat the smoke without actually putting out the fire,
Yep.
right? And
Go ahead.
I'm sorry,
Don't
my
be sorry.
notes are getting lost here.
It
Uh,
happens.
and the other part of that is we've also talked with the ACEs study is the trauma itself, especially a trauma as horrific as childhood sexual abuse, can explain so much of these symptoms, these physical symptoms that this adult might be experiencing later on. And to add then, and I mean it when I say the trauma of dieting, or at the very least, the futility of it, right? The fact that it
Hmm.
simply doesn't work is unconscionable to me, especially from physicians who have pledged to do no harm,
Yep.
right? So that's the first tie-in is through the ACEs study and the trauma piece, but also you might not know that eating disorders are the deadliest of all mental illnesses, and
I
specifically
did not know that.
those with anorexia nervosa. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among those with anorexia
Um,
nervosa specifically. So again, we really have to, when we're addressing the complexity of this issue, look at it
wow.
in a much broader way and realize that as it stands with the, again, the BMI and the prescription of weight loss being the gold standard,
Hmm.
we are doing way more harm than good. And we are certainly, we're impacting not just physical health, but mental health as well.
Wow. Thank you. I didn't know that. I honestly would think that depression would be the highest cause of suicide for somebody with a mental illness, but your eating disorders?
Absolutely. Well, interestingly, the tie-in is this. When the body is making that sophisticated effort for the person to regain weight that has been lost, especially in the case with and please though, don't think that everyone with anorexia
No.
nervosa is thin, right? That's another thing that kills people with anorexia nervosa is their the same eating disorder that is treated in a thin person is praised in a fat person, right?
Yep.
So that's a factor. But as your body makes that extremely sophisticated effort, that includes things like reducing the hormones that cause you to feel fullness and hunger, making the mood depressed so that you don't get out of bed, so that you're not
Yeah.
spending any energy, right? So these things all make sense, but at the end of the day, it's about quality of life, right? I mean, those of us who, whether it's you've always enjoyed thin privilege or, you've been one of those people who wait cycles because you continue to participate in diet culture. Um, we know that there's so much reward in our society for being thin. It really isn't unlike white supremacy. It's thin supremacy. We truly believe that thin bodies are superior,
Thank
right?
God the past few years, finally, things are changing though with advertisers, with
Yeah.
those skinny supermodel type looks. And God bless you if you have a body like that, but most people don't look like that. It's like the 1%. And they're showing real women now. And I get the Macy's catalog. I love Macy's. And there's real women, different colors, different shapes, different
Oh,
in
it's so
lingerie. And I'm like,
refreshing. It's so
why? Because it's
refreshing.
so
And
sad that we epitomize that as being what should be, and hence cause a lot of, I'm sure, anorexia and people thinking they have to look like that. I mean, what's funny? I just watched, which I didn't really like it, but it was the Princess Diana story,
oh yeah.
by what's her name from, uh, God, it was called Diana. What was her name? The girl from the scary, I can't think of her name, not the scary, the vampire movies. Anyway, she played her.
Sure.
Yes, Kristen Stewart, and she played her, and the whole movie was about her taking her finger in her mouth and vomiting. It was not the movie I was expecting, but I'm
Oh,
like, even to put a movie out like that, like just showing that behind the scenes look, I was disgusted. I'm like, poor woman who really had to suffer like that. But the whole movie was about that. It was just bizarre, but that really got me.
and yet, I mean, we know she passed away in the late 90s, and and now even still our most prominent feminists, those who are really doing good work, I won't name names, but many women on the planet, white women doing really good work who are still participating and even prescribing diet culture to their using their vast platforms to do so. And it's like, on one hand, you think you're fighting the patriarchy, and on this very real hand, you're bowing
Yeah,
down to it,
yeah.
frankly, right?
Ugh,
So I say, and I'll end on this, that I really think that for the vast majority of people, not just women, but the vast majority of people who would let go of this idea of a specific weight, right? A goal weight, and just let themselves eat for pleasure and let their body weight settle where they want to, maybe a little bit higher, and watch your health improve dramatically, physically, mentally. It certainly has happened for me, right? I mean, it turns out that once you feel good in your body, however you got there, you don't really care what it looks like anymore.
Yep,
Just like when your body looks a certain way, it's no guarantee you're happy, right? Look at some of the people, some of the most quote beautiful or conventionally beautiful people are the most unhappy, right? And
absolutely.
so we're looking for love in all the wrong places.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all
And
this
healthy.
information, Kat. We have to wrap it up,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Gosh, best of luck on your trip.
Oh, thank you so
You're
much.
gonna
It's
come
gonna be
back with a new perspective. I'm sorry, when you go
come
away on
back
a
so
work
focused
vacation.
and energized,
Yeah,
and yes, I'm excited. So reach out to me. My phone number is 856-334-0018. My website is CHS Yoga. That stands for Compassionate Healing Services, yoga.com. My Instagram is Compassionate Healing Services, at Compassionate Healing Services. And you can email me at info@compassionatehealingservices.com.
perfect. Thank you so much. Pleasure having you here, and we'll
Thank
talk
you
soon.
so.
Enjoy
Okay.
your work vacation, and we'll talk next week when you get back, okay?
All right. Sounds good.
All right, thank you. Have a great day. Bye bye, Kat.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you can now listen live on the MyTuner Radio and online Radio Box apps for iOS, Android, and the Amazon App Store. Or check us out online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com or search Podcast Business News Network on onlineradiobox.com/US so you don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, I mean, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.